Chapter 27. Falling Back. Caleb chose a direction to move as the generals dispersed and wandered the halls in search of Layla or his father, all the while avoiding contact with any of the soldiers standing post or marching from one room to another. As he walked between the pillars in the main hall on the first floor, completely out of places to look, he heard a hiss come from somewhere off to his right. A door was cracked open, and he could see Layla's unmistakable red hair on the other side. He slipped through and shut the door, finding himself in a large kitchen filled with shelves and hearths. Several cooks were hard at work, and other servants were coming and going from other corridors branching away elsewhere. None of them seemed to even notice their presence. He hugged Layla in relief, drinking in the sweetness of her spirit. Before he could say anything, she dragged him by the arm, quickly leading him down an aisle in between the shelves of pots and pans to a small pantry door. Damon was inside, sitting on a small stool and eating a piece of fruit from a bag on the floor. The pantry was only just big enough for all of them, and as Caleb pushed himself up into a corner, Layla secured the door by forcing a broom up under the handle. Damon stood up and clapped him on the shoulder. "You are back." "We were starting to worry," Layla added. "And when we heard that awful scream, I nearly went into a panic." "Did you hear that?" It echoed through the entire building. Caleb leaned against the wall. It seemed years since he had been in the company of friends. "I heard it," he said. "I saw it." Layla and Damon's eyes grew intense at the words. "The Queen. The Lioness. She earns her title. She butchered one of her own before a group of her men. I was lucky to get out alive." "How could she?" Layla muttered with a hand over her mouth. Damon had turned the other way, and was looking at the floor. "I do not know," Caleb answered. "But fate has been with us this day. Julam's rafters proved true, and I was able to hear everything. But from what I have learned, they are not planning to hold council until tonight," Damon said. "We should have waited until then." "They can wait until the second watch tonight for all I care," Caleb said. "All the better for us." The Queen was there with Marmius, and they informed a new general of her next strategy. "Is that so?" Damon asked, turning back with urgency in his eyes. Caleb nodded. "The general was Palson. The one you recognized from your dreams, Layla. Father, the Queen is returning to Talgarth tomorrow morning, and General Palson is to lead an attack on Paladar in Faldesia. That is Ansel and Alastra's homeland." Layla gasped. Damon rubbed his eyes and in a rare moment of anger pushed a line of foodstuffs off of the shelf. "The fools," he said. "Paladar is the capital of Faldesia. Not an easy target, even with the numbers she brought this morning." "I know," Caleb agreed. "But they possess something that gives them courage to attempt such a feat." The Queen spoke of some kind of gift she had been given by the voice from beyond. And there was mention of beast men or some sort of thing. This voice was most disturbing. "I have now heard with my own ears that which King Roland spoke of in Grimhall. The Queen is somehow in communion with specters of an unseen world. It appears there is far more to her than we feared." Damon was holding his chin as he listened, but unlike Layla, did not seem at all surprised. "Father?" Caleb was no longer in the mood for his secrets. "If you know something of this, I would have you say it now," he said sharply. "Lives of our countrymen are at stake." Damon glared at him. "Fool boy. I know nothing more than you do." "Enough, father. You said in Tritus that you had met Lord Marmius before. What of that tale? Why are you so afraid to tell your own son the truth about everything? About my own mother's death?" Damon moved in close with steel anger in his eyes. "I have told you about your mother. And there is nothing to know about Marmius or his black-hearted queen than that which you witnessed today. Do not speak to me of truth. What is here and now is all that matters. Life is neither truth nor lies but what hides in between." Caleb gritted his teeth at the sudden emotions that he had surfaced. He was not afraid of his father, but had rarely seen him in such a state of aggravation. He was looking at a different man. "Stop this at once," Layla demanded, fearlessly coming between them. "Talgarth armies and specters marching on Paladar. is more reason than we need to get back to the others at the inn and tell them right away. Paladar must be warned. We must get ahead of Talgarth while we have the chance." "You are right, Layla," Caleb said, turning from Damon. "All of this will be for nothing if we cannot use what we have learned. The shadows of the past matter little. Let us be out of this place." Damon pulled his Talgarth hood over his head. "I shall lead the way. Julam should be waiting for us near the back entrance. Keep up." He brushed past them and led them cautiously out of the pantry and through the kitchen to a door with a narrow hallway on the other side. They all followed one another in silence, the air still heavy from Caleb's confrontation with his father. Clearly his remarks had hit their mark somewhere deep within him. He did not intend to upset his father, but he did not regret it either. These were things he needed to hear. Layla drew near to Caleb and spoke softly. "Caleb, I also saw General Palson while you were away. I spoke with him." "You what?" Caleb hissed. "Nearly led us into trouble too," Damon said from up ahead, his frustration still simmering. They made their way cautiously around the edge of the banquet room, taking cover behind the pillars. There were no guards in the room, but all of the tall glass windows around them made Caleb uneasy. Layla ignored Damon's comment but whispered lower so he could not hear the rest. "I was out scouting around on the second level, when all of a sudden he was there before me." "How did you avoid being found out? Are you sure he is not following us?" Caleb shot a glance behind them. "It was all right," she said calmly. "I was very surprised at first to see him, but I was not afraid. He is a good man." It was as if I were speaking with one whom I already know. Fate's will is a mysterious thing, is it not? After all, I came along with you and your father in hopes of finding answers, and I got just that. "You felt you knew him because of your dreams?" Caleb said with more confusion than doubt. Layla sighed and looked at the polished floor of the banquet room. They had reached the large doors that would take them outside onto the back veranda. Damon waited there for Julam as if he were standing guard, while Caleb and Layla continued talking behind a nearby pillar. "Layla? What is it?" Caleb asked. She looked earnestly up at him. Her eyes had a new depth to them. An added measure of understanding that seemed to cast a dark cloud over the glow of her face. "I know now that they are not dreams," she said. "I've seen General Palson's life. His real life." "What?" Caleb asked, shaking his head. "How could that?" "I do not know how," Layla said with an odd clarity. "But it is true. I spoke of his home in the Esterlands, of scenes I have seen only in my dreams, and he knew them. I understand now. I have seen much of his life. And it is a sad one. He is a good man." Caleb was gawking. How was this even possible? He wanted to believe her, but too much of his will had been drained by the Queen and all of the events of the day. He simply leaned against the pillar with a dumbfounded look stamped upon his face. "Any man that marches with Talgarth is an enemy, good man or no," he said. He struggled to show some kind of support. "So you saw this man's past then?" "And his present. And future, I believe," Layla said, adding to his befuddlement. "And that means the other things I have seen are real also." A heavy look of sadness overcame her, and she looked at the floor again. "I have seen so many things, even my thoughts of late wander to places unknown while I am yet awake and in broad daylight. Things that cannot be of my own creation. So many places. So many people. My mind is full of them. I've tried to conceal it from the others, but I fear I cannot prevail." Caleb heard the tone of her voice move from perplexity to fear as she spoke. He took a deep breath and placed a hand on her shoulder. It was all he could do. Slowly she moved close and he wrapped his arms around her while she rested her head on his chest. "What is happening to me, Caleb?" He held her, at a total loss for what to think. "As you said, fate has a mysterious way. We will find in time what all of this means." He doubted his own words. Anselm had turned his and Caleb's beds in the other room back onto their feet, and rested an unconscious Leothrin on one, leaving her swords on the floor. He helped his sister to the other bed, and she sat down on the edge of it with her head in her hands, her hair falling over her face, totally exhausted from the hex the stranger had put over her. Anselm moved to the other room, and began pulling the sheets off of one of their beds to wrap Cliff's corpse as well as he could. He didn't want to alert the innkeeper. Not yet, not until the others came back from the manor and they could all discuss what was best to be done, if they came back at all. Elastra wearily approached the doorframe, and looked at the damage. "You need to be resting, El. Go back and sit down." "I'm all right." "I'm all right," she said, wincing and massaging her neck. She was too frustrated to sit still. "I've never felt anything that powerful before. I was resisting with all the mental energy I could muster, but it wasn't enough." She put a hand on her head. "Damn well almost killed myself trying." Anselm finished wrapping the sheet around Cliff and tied it off tightly at the top. "I hope she's all right," Elastra said, glancing back to Leothrin. Anselm stood and absently wiped his hands on his warden robe. He made a disgusted face when he realized a rag would have been better. "She will be," he said. From the looks of it, he knocked her head pretty hard on the wall when she was thrown. "I didn't get the chance to try my luck on our guest, so I can heal her. Shouldn't take more than a first degree." Elastra started gathering and organizing their belongings that had been thrown about in the struggle, inspecting each one for damage as she found them, while Anselm took a seat on the bed beside Leothrin. Her head was cocked to one side, and as he rolled up his sleeves to begin a healing hex, he realized that her dark hair hid the wound and he did not know where to focus his power. Instead, he found himself just looking at her, mystified again as if seeing her for the first time. He looked at the patch covering her eye, and thought of all she must have been through. Fighting Talgarth for her people somewhere in the Estelans, taken captive and enslaved for fate knows how long, and in the process losing half of her sight. He realized then he knew nearly nothing about her. Who was she? Where was her family? A feeling of sympathy overcame him. In that moment, all he wanted to do was protect her and be by her side, to aid wherever he could. The sudden jumbled feelings of affection felt more like a recognition of something that had already been there than a recent development. Fool Ansel. What am I thinking? She doesn't need my help. She's a more capable fighter than I'll ever be. What could the poor son of a cobbler possibly do for her? My hexes could be of service, but now's not the time. She won't feel any better with you staring at her, Elastra said from behind. He snapped out of his stupor and turned to see her leaning in the doorframe again with her arms crossed and a smirk on her face. Anselm shook his head. "I was only wondering where I should focus the hex," he stammered, knowing full well that his sister knew exactly what he was thinking. She always did. They never could hide anything from one another. "Right," she said. "Of course." "And what about you?" Anselm said in retaliation. "If I'm not mistaken, you're concerned for someone right now as well." Elastra waved the comment away but did not deny it. "There's no escaping these sorts of things," she sighed. "Whether it is hopeless or not. Perhaps you do take risks after all, brother." She looked at Leothrin. "She has been one big risk from the beginning, and now you can't get her out of your head." "She has more than proven herself," Anselm said. "Surely you take back now the things you said in Tritus." Elastra thought for a moment and shrugged, seeming not to remember. "You said she could not be trusted. She is not the shadow walker you thought she was." He expected some kind of argument, but Elastra just shook her head. "No. She isn't." She gave him a weary smile, and went back to work gathering their things and cleaning up the mess. Anselm felt for his sister, but did not know anything he could say to comfort her. Anselm put his right hand over the back of Leothrin's head, and prepared to begin a healing hex in the general area. His fingers formed an L shape over her, while the other hand hovered above it in the proper formation, fisted but with his first and middle finger pointing outward. The small white light of a first-degree hex glowed from his palm, and strands of her hair waved gently in the light breeze it created. He could feel the influence of the whisper, the deity Furin sending the power of light, and he felt something in the back of his mind fade away as if he had suddenly forgotten something he was going to say. Anselm felt the vague pain of the small wound subsiding and opened his eyes. To his surprise, Leothran was watching him. She sat up holding the side of her head, moaning and muttering something in her own tongue that sounded to Anselm like a curse, then turned to him. "You took quite the hit when he threw you." She felt for her weapons and spotted them on the floor in the other room. "Don't worry," Anselm said. "He's gone now." Leothran shook her head, as if she had just woken up from a strange dream. "I feel renewed. You healed me. That is twice I am in your debt." Anselm smiled. "Nonsense. You've paid what debt you may have had in your journey with us. If it weren't for your help, this quest of ours probably would have ended a long time ago. Besides, your healing abilities would have had you coming around in no time without my help." "Thank you," she said with a smile. Her eye was faintly glowing yellow again in the dim light of the room, and Anselm did all he could not to gaze into it. Elastra had finished turning most of the furniture back to its place and piling the damaged things in one of the corners. Anselm got off of the bed and helped Leothran to her feet. "Are you all right, Elastra?" she asked. "I'm fine now." "And the boy? Could your hexes do anything else for him?" "Not a thing. He is gone," Elastra said grimly. She gestured with her head to the corner of the room behind her, and Leothran went to see his body wrapped up in the bedsheet. She shook her head sadly. Out of the quiet came the sudden sound of heavy footsteps in the hall, running down the stairs. Leothran ran and scooped up her swords, and Anselm and his sister drew their knives again. They each jumped to a side of the door separating the rooms, and Leothran made ready to charge down the center, a fierce fire glowing in her eye. They all expected to see red cloaks or gruels or even the tall stranger burst through the door, but instead saw Caleb followed by Damon and Layla. All three of them stopped abruptly to take in the wreckage of the room.
Thank you for listening. Subscribe and ring the bell so you don't miss the next chapter. Episodes go live every Monday and Friday morning at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. The audiobook can be purchased in its entirety on Google Play Books. Get the whole trilogy now in both paperback and ebook formats. All links are in the description.